A rejection from a traditional publisher in the modern era is utterly, utterly meaningless. You could upload it to Amazon right now and publish it. You could work with Scribe Media or Page Two, a hybrid publisher. You could record the audio yourself and upload it through ACX to Audible. You don't have to have a book contract to do a book.
People had no choice, right? It was some oligopoly and people with big printing presses and trucks. You had to go through them.
Dear Mr. O'Shaughnessy, I do not understand why you would have, in your wildest dreams, thought that we would be in the least bit interested in such a boring and, awful topic.
Somebody in the organization doesn't particularly like a book or like a concept, and they'll just say, nah, it's not for us.
The extra tragedy is all the books that never get written because of this system.
The pendulum is swinging very hard back to the creator's favor. I'm holding up an old BlackBerry. I think that they're even behind this.
There was an era where if you got your book proposal rejected a dozen times, you just stopped. We are not in that era anymore. Go publish it. Find a partner, upload it to Kindle, write it, distribute it.
Well, hello, everyone. You caught us in the middle of our chuckling and laughing because today we are going to talk about some easy, maybe potentially easy industries that are just begging to be disintermediated. If you go to our website at osv.llc, you will see a lot of articles. And that might give you a tiny hint about which industries we think are going to be disintermediated, improved upon, new playbook. My guests today are two of my favorite people, Jimmy Soni, who's written three of my favorite books, Jimmy. I mean, my God, you had me with Claude Shannon and then like the founders, and I'm like, and Liberty, we'll still call you Liberty, Michael, although this will probably be released after people know that you are now on the team at OSV. Yay!
Yes. It feels weird because I still have to keep it a secret for now, but by the time this comes out, it should be official.
Indeed.
Hi, everyone.
As our lead for the Infinite Media vertical, because Michael has literally one of the best eyes that I've ever seen in terms of finding things that are both incredibly useful and incredibly interesting and saving all the rest of us who are incredibly lazy like me hundreds of hours of our time. So I'd pay virtually any price.
He was ChatGPT 3 before there was ChatGPT 3.
He definitely was.
Maybe
Hey, God.
With far, just to be clear, with far more personality and voice and humor.
Yeah.
I have Sydney built him.
So today we're going to talk about the publishing industry. We are working on, as part of Infinite Media, a division, Infinite Books, because I love books. I have written 4 books, but I think that the publishing industry, if you're watching this as opposed to listening to us, I'm holding up an old BlackBerry. I think that they're even behind this. I don't think any of my publishers back in the Paleolithic 90s even had these when they were broadly available. And I'm going to be the one to kind of start this out because you guys have such great ideas about this. But my experience, I've written 4 books with 3 separate publishers, and I'm not going to name names, but I'm going to tell our audience that in my experience, back when I was publishing books, there wasn't an alternative, really. You had to find a publisher. And so you needed the imperator of a publisher to even get your book out there. That's changed dramatically. But after finding a publisher, or at least I, was incredibly excited. Oh my God, this is great. I'm going to have an editor. I'm going to have people doing PR for me. I'm going to have a marketing plan for the book. This is awesome. Spoiler alert, that didn't happen at all. Jimmy, I don't want you to say anything negative, but have you gotten has the publishing industry just magically transformed? And it's completely different today because, after all, I haven't published anything for a while.
Yeah. let me talk about the positive, the kind of positive inverse of what you're saying is authors today are even more on the hook for all the things you described. They're required to be vastly more entrepreneurial. They, I mean, I tell myself and I tell friends who are in the book business, you really do need to think of yourself as the CEO of the publishing operation. You're also the CMO, the COO, all the C's. You're the entire C-suite. You have one product. It's a book, 3 iterations, the digital, the audio, and the hardcover, and it's on you. Everything's on you. And, again, like I've had my share of traditional publishing experiences, but I have found that if you have an eye to like how the internet works, how digital publishing works, how promotion and marketing work, you can do a lot if you're an author that a traditional publisher might not think to do. And I think the head scratching part of it is why hasn't traditional publishing adopted a lot of what, has made certain books take off, or a lot of habits that you are native to the internet that you just feel like, oh, this is sort of obvious. Why aren't we doing this? I'll say more, but let's start with that as the appetizer.
I think that's a great appetizer, and audiobooks spring to mind, and I'm going to steal a lot of your ideas. But it seems to me that in a digital age, and I guess this would be true for the digital copies as well of books, in a digital age, my vision, and I'm going to ask Michael because he enunciates it better than I do, but my vision is that books should be living things. And audiobooks have taken off because people consume books differently than they used to, right? They listen to them when they're commuting or when they're exercising or whatever. And you had some great ideas that I'm not going to steal. I'm going to let you tell the world, and then I'm going to have Michael talk a bit about the living book. But my point of view is that I think publishing, even when I was doing it back in the 90s, it was a very listen, I think New York is the greatest city in the world. I do. I love it. I live here. It's amazing, but it can be incredibly parochial. And you made a comment that I'm going to ask you to jump off on some of your ideas about audiobooks, because I think they're great, and we are definitely going to steal them all for infinite books. But you had a observation that I share with you. That is, if like people at cocktail parties in Manhattan aren't talking about a subject, it doesn't exist. And it made me think of the old Pauline Kael, who used to be the film critic for the New Yorker. She, after Nixon won the presidency, she earnestly said, "Nixon won? How could he have won? I don't know a single person who voted for him." Jimmy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is we're the three of us are likely in agreement on a lot of these things. And sometimes what I want to do when I'm in a situation where we're all in agreement is to act like to make sure that I get my points across, but also to steel man the arguments that might come from the publishing industry, and then sort of think about how do you square them with the reality. But here's what I would say. This is a challenge of any big organization in any industry, which is when change happens, big organizations have a really, really, really hard time adapting. It's why the Netflix transformation story is so amazing. It's why Apple's renaissance and continuing to innovate is so amazing, because they are big super tanker organizations and they're able to meaningfully like change direction. When I first got started in publishing, I had somebody tell me, "Oh, audiobooks like aren't a thing. Don't worry about it. It's basically just like a carbon copy of your book. They'll get some actor to read it, and no big deal. It'll be on CDs, and then there'll be some digital file in this tiny little service called Audible that nobody uses, and you can call it a day." Right? This is sort of when I got started, like probably over a decade ago. I haven't seen much movement in the direction of changing that mindset within traditional publishing, despite the fact that today, full transparency, for the founders, I have more audiobook sales. It's a plurality of my book sales. It's outsold hardcover, and it's outsold the ebook. Wow. And there are very good reasons for that, right? But like, given just the units, you would think there would be more innovation in that delivery model. And I'll give, just so people don't think we're talking in abstractions, let's just like talk about a book that I assume at least some number of listeners have gotten. If you buy David Goggins's Can't Hurt Me, the actual physical book, and if you buy his audiobook, you will notice that the audiobook is not just like a dry rereading of the actual book. After every chapter of the audiobook, David and his author, whose name escapes me, but his author and David sit and basically have like a chat about the chapter they just read, right? And it's really cool because you get stuff in the audiobook that you are not going to get in the traditional book. And what did they do there? They innovated with a model that is open for innovation, experimentation, where the cost of doing that is much lower. Let's like play it out the other way. You could see how a publisher might not want to do a little chit chat thing after every chapter in a printed book. It would add to the number of pages. It would add to the weight. It might make it seem like impenetrably long. On audio, there's just a few extra minutes, and it's like David and his co-author having this like amazing discussion. But in spite of that, I find the traditional publishers are still very locked in on this idea that audiobooks should just be carbon copies of the original book with no real room for innovation or iteration. Let me give you a second example. This is hours old. I was on the phone with an author who's about to publish their book. I was just asking for advice, trying to like, let's talk shop, see what you can do. And she said, I offered to the producers of the audiobook to read the audiobook. She's doing a book about crypto. And she said the person they hired doesn't have familiarity with a lot of this lingo. And when she reads it, it sounds like she doesn't have familiarity with a lot of lingo. Now, I'm not going to name names either, but that's horrendous to me, right? The idea that like someone is volunteering to do it. They could go into a studio, like in a city, and record it. They have written the book and they're willing to take hours away from their professional life to do this. And the publisher is saying, now we were good. We have a way we do things, right? I would say that's like the tip of a massive iceberg of potential for audio that is different, that has a different life, that has a different texture, flavor, feel than the actual book. But traditional publishing has a very particular way they want to approach this. And I have to tell you, like as an author, it's something that I just see as a massive missed opportunity, right? Like, why wouldn't you, if you can get somebody to buy the hardcover and then they get interested in the product and then they want to buy the follow-on product, the audio, because it's a little bit different, why wouldn't you try to get the 2-for-1 in that situation? And by the way, many of us know people who will either buy the hardcover, then buy the audio, or buy the audio, then buy the hardcover, whether as a gift or for themselves. But why does everything need to be a copy of itself, right? Like it really doesn't have to be. We're talking about a totally different format. We're talking about a format that honestly is more about like the rhythm and texture and feel of podcasting, which you guys do really well, that doesn't have to be exactly like the book, right? Like it really doesn't. You could introduce whatever you want. And I think, look, there may be some good reasons. People may say, well, the production schedules and this and that, and like you've got to stick to a deadline and it gets crazy if the author has a million ideas. Yes, and like mass-produced audio that is cheap and easy to do is the way our world operates these days. Like we've got the tools to do it. There should be more effective mechanisms by which the audiobook is a totally different entity. And what's really interesting, by the way, on the economic side of this is there was an era in which publishers, as you know, Jim, totally ignored audio. Audible came around. They sold a bunch of deals, right? They bought a bunch of rights because the publishers were like, forget audio. And now knowing what audio is worth, you can't actually carve out your audio rights anymore. And publishers are for sure going to own them because they know that people for books like mine or books like any books, there's like this plurality of sales that are coming through audio. And yet, despite that, there's just not the same, like you're always kept at arm's length from that process. I suppose I would ask the question, why? Like there doesn't seem to be a good reason. All right. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Rant over. I'll let you guys get a word in. This is clearly personal.
So that actually just so many great jumping off points. And I'm just going to flip it to Michael Liberty because we've talked about this extensively, about all of the ways that the new tools, that the internet, that AI, et cetera, make these kinds of innovations. And I, just to make it easy for my own chunking of memories, think of it as the living book. Michael, you want to take us eloquently through this idea of a living book?
I'll do my best. I feel like an outsider as the only person on this call who hasn't published a book. But I've been writing online for 20 years, and I'm a great fan of books. And what Jimmy said is rings so true, right? It feels like every medium has its pros and cons, its characteristics, its ways to innovate, and the legacy publishing industry seems to be trying to fit everything into the mold of books, which is what they've known for decades, and now audiobooks have to fit into that mold, and ebooks have to fit in there, and everything needs to be there. And they also seem very keen on keeping the relationship with the reader, right? Rather than the writer having a direct relationship with its readers or listeners or whatever the case may be. So it feels to me like the best thing to do would be to use the advantages of every medium, right? So for example, with the audiobooks, there's all kinds of ways to have extras in there that wouldn't necessarily fit into a book. But what about if at the end, when you reach the end, there's a way to click or to subscribe to the author's podcast and you keep the relationship alive, right? Because every time you write a new book, you kind of have to let your audience know about it. But what if you have an ongoing relationship with the audience? As a creator, that's what I would want, right? Same with the written book. If you have a paper copy in your hands, maybe there's not an easy way to change it, but maybe there's a way to link off to something digital elsewhere, either, if the writer has a newsletter, a podcast or something, but there may be even a way to have this living version of a book online that may be written first online, like chapter by chapter on some kind of newsletter where you get feedback from your best readers in some ways, right? Because the people most interested in you or in the topic are going to be the early adopters that get in, that find you even before the book is announced and is out. And these people can help you shape the thing and be your kind of initial kind of focus group. And as the book gets built, maybe at some point it's kind of like, okay, it's mature enough, there's going to be a printed version and this is V1, but in the same way that you can add to audio with a podcast, maybe even on the website, you can have as a kind of newsletter format where you have this direct link with readers. Well, I wrote this chapter about X, and now there's a bunch of updates. I've had new ideas, and there's these kind of addendums that could be added to chapters, and the book can keep growing and living, right? And you keep the relationship alive, and maybe that's the second edition that's better enough from the first that some people will buy it again, right? The biggest, or there's all kinds of ways of keeping the thing more alive and creating this ongoing relationship with readers that I don't feel the publishing industry is really doing. And I feel like there's probably also a way to have a kind of funnel where people get aware of you, they become aware of you and the idea, and maybe a book is too much for them at first, right? They don't know if they're going to like it. Well, maybe you have a 2-minute video on YouTube that kind of gives the general idea, and that sounds interesting, and that moves you to the book. But maybe in between there's a 45-minute podcast that you record that's kind of like more goes more in depth, right? Gives more detail, but it's not quite the book yet. And you can kind of move people to different levels, right? And some people may just be interested in the first part and they stick to that, and that's fine, but you've already started a relationship with them, and maybe they'll come back and maybe they remember it. Like that's part of the kind of online marketing you can do with this direct relationship. But it feels like going from zero to a book is a hard sell for a lot of people. And so that's why the audiobook is so popular. People can listen to it while walking the dog, and that reduces friction, but there's all kinds of other ways of reducing friction. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's some of the ideas I feel like are kind of obvious in this zero cost distribution world where, publishers are not doing it.
Yeah. And it's, one of my ideas is that the peer-to-peer networking is just going to explode. I think given the innovations that we have today, not only AI, but things like Substack. I saw the piece where the guy was going to write his next entire book on Substack.
Yep.
And it just seems to me to cry out for A/B testing, right? It doesn't mean we're going to get everything right. We'll, like I've said many, many times, we'll make a lot of mistakes at O'Shaughnessy Ventures. We hope that they're going to be novel mistakes so that we can learn from them in the Shannon sense, Jimmy. I'll give you a nod there. These are not costly endeavors. When you're dealing with digital assets, for the most part, it doesn't matter if you try 1 million different things, right? The cost to you remains de minimis. It's your time and it's your effort, right? And so one of the things that we talked about last when we were not recording a podcast is the idea of why not experiment with variable pricing? Why not? Why not? I don't want to give up the book that you're currently working on, Jimmy, unless you're willing to. But like you, when we talked offline, you have all these amazing. Well, let's actually make it about the founders. Your book, The Founders. You have all of these amazing interviews with, come on, some of the most interesting people in the world. Why not? Why not an experiment where you can release some of the interview tape with that person's approval?
Yeah.
I'm not being crazy here, am I?
No, you're not. And it's the kind of thing that I would say is a hard sell at a big organization, a traditional publisher, where certain things are done a certain way. I mean, it's one of these things that like it's a question that these are various questions I have asked myself over the years. What I would say, let's shift slightly. Not let me frame it differently, because there are probably people listening who want to write books, and they think that the industry and the process of writing a book is opaque and it's hard to get through. And if you're not working with a traditional publisher, you're hosed. And one way to reframe our conversation is to say, you're actually not. Like, if you have a great idea and you already have it done, you could upload it to Amazon right now and publish it. And if you have an audience, you could sell it to millions and millions of people. You could work with Scribe Media or Page Two, a hybrid publisher that these days there's sort of no distinction between them and any other publisher, with the exception that you pay them for services, right? You could record the audio yourself and upload it through ACX to Audible and make that happen on your own. I think one of the interesting things about book publishing is it's like they're in the information business, but they're a remarkably opaque business, right? But I think for people listening who are motivated, who want to do books, just know you don't have to have a book contract to do a book. I will speak from personal experience and be very, very candid. I am talking to authors who regularly, almost weekly, I have a call with a fellow author, and we are talking about how we're going to do our next book, either hybrid or self-published. Because the other part of the industry that people don't appreciate is that even if you get some money from a publisher, you're not getting Prince Harry money, first of all. Second of all, they're going to take 80 to 90% of your royalties. So you only get new money when you've earned back whatever the advance is. The advance is also subject to taxes and agent fees. So the truth is, for a lot of authors, in fact, I would say for the majority of authors, if you can sell your product, you are far better off doing self-publishing or hybrid publishing. There's actually very little benefit these days to a traditional publisher in that sense. Like maybe at the margins, maybe if you're writing a politically sensitive book, or you feel like you can get sued and you need some big entity behind you if you get sued. But the truth is, for a lot of authors and people listening, if you want to do a book, you can find a way to do a book, and you will probably be better off financially if you do it on your own. And I think that's because of digital tools. It's because of on-demand printing. It's because of a million things that have happened that have made this process easier. But my view is like there are still things that, for my purposes, traditional publishing has done very well. But what's happening is that their moat is eroding, right? Like they're not actually going to be able to make an argument that says, oh, you need to work with us or else there's no other way to publish a book. That's just not true anymore. I have done several traditionally published books. I am actively thinking about whether or not I will be with a traditional publisher in the future, and I'm not the only one. There are authors who have sold millions of copies who have basically walked away and said, hey, this is crazy. You take 85% of the take, you give me a meager advance, I don't get full operational and creative control. You don't allow me to A/B test covers. You don't allow me to A/B test titles. You're not running search ads. You're not running social ads. What exactly is it that is like being provided here as a service, especially when I can pay for all that on my own and then take that 80% on the back end as well? And again, I'm not like, I've had a lot of luck with my traditionally published books. I've had great editors. The copy editing at traditional publishing houses, I mean, it's second to none. It's like anything, it's like nothing I've ever seen. The level of attention to detail is crazy. But if traditional publishing does not start to do these things, the audio innovations we just talked about, literally testing covers to see what covers are best rather than just trying to define what works, right? Testing titles, doing more foreign rights translations, figuring out where you can get into foreign markets. Like, an authors over time will have no incentive to go with a traditional publisher because all of the incentives will be in the direction of hybrid or self-published.
Yeah, and incentives like tell the tale, right? It amazes me how many people don't get that. I have had conversations in other industries where literally I will be sitting at a lunch table with somebody and they're trying to convince me to get person X to do something for, compensation Y. And I take out my iPhone and I use the calculator and I show them and I said, and the number is like 10x what they're offering. And I say, this is what you're competing against. Do you understand that? And it seems like, what's the old Upton Sinclair quote? You can't get somebody to understand something where his salary depends on him not understanding it. And I get these blank looks. Uh, Michael, jump in because you probably know more about what's out there and what's available in the form of tools that could be used. We're going to package up a bunch of those tools at OSV and Infinite Media, but like extend Jimmy's argument a bit, if you would.
You mean as far as platform and alternatives to
Platform,
publish?
tools,
Oh,
all of those things.
there's a lot. And what's interesting is that these things are moving targets for publishers, right? Because publishers are not improving very fast. You may even say that they're deteriorating, the moat is eroding. Meanwhile, I joined Substack, which is my main platform for publishing, about 2.5 years ago. And in those years, they've built so many features, so many great things that have helped me as a publisher, right? And in the meantime, others have come up like Beehive, like Ghost, that are all improving. ConvertKit. There's all these platforms that are competing with one another to be as good to creators as possible, right? And when Jimmy talks about publishers keeping like 85 or 90% of the revenue, well, on Substacks, it's the inverse, right? They take 10% and there's some Stripe fees and everything, but the creator keeps about 85%. And to me, that sounds a lot more fair because like the creator basically does all of the real high value work. The rest is important. It helps. It's distribution, it's copy editing, it's all kind of stuff, but it's not the most differentiated part of the creation, right? If publisher A doesn't want to do your book, well, publisher B can probably do a fairly equivalent job. But if the writer doesn't want to do it, the book just doesn't exist, right? That's the differentiated part, and that feels to me very wrong that 85% of Jimmy's revenue that he's earning, right? People are giving dollars to read Jimmy's word, not to buy the book from publisher X, that they're going to someone else. So this is something that it has to change somehow. Like it's not sustainable. It feels like a model that exists because people had no choice, right? It was some oligopoly and people with big printing presses and trucks. You had to go through them. But now the Ted Gioia post that you mentioned about how he's going to publish his next book on Substack, he gives 10 reasons why, right? I think we should put it in the show notes. I can't make justice to the whole thing, but as someone who's been working inside of that system, I think he makes a very, very good case that he's going to have a direct relationship with his readers. He's going to make a lot more money. He's going to have a lot more freedom because now a lot of contracts with publishing contracts seems to include all kinds of other clauses where it's like, well, if you make a fuss on social media, if people start being mad at you, like we can drop you, like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't talk about this. Like it's starting to be almost dystopian, right? And how they try to control people. All of the greatest books of the past 100 years, like how many of those would have been written by someone who get canceled today, right? Or couldn't get that contract. So it feels like we're on this inflection point where like the power is going to go back on the creative side because that's where most of the value is. And now the distribution has been commoditized, but that's just my guess.
And of course that was the whole raison d'etre for O'Shaughnessy Ventures, right?
Yep.
We see, or our thesis is that the pendulum is swinging very hard back to the creator's favor, because the whole. I used to joke that the reason that the Catholic Church works so well for centuries was because they had the best distribution network, right? They had churches and priests in every part of the fucking world. And there were no books that people could buy. And it is not a big leap to understand that Gutenberg's printing press is what made all of the other versions of Christianity possible, right? because,
Mhm.
oh, wait a minute, I can nail something to the church wall here and I can write a book and I can publish the Bible in somebody's own language. Like all of this is, if you look at it in terms of distribution, right? We still think in terms of the old distribution, but it's not that way anymore, Michael.
If I can add something, and something that's very, very dear to my art, right? And we talked a bit about this with David Sinner on our last podcast, but the real tragedy to me is, right? Yes, it's hard for writers. They have all kinds of, like, I wish things were a lot easier for Jimmy and he made a lot more money. But the extra tragedy is all the books that never get written because of this system. There's all kinds of people with great stuff to say out there, geniuses, and people just doing something else with their lives. And if it was easy enough and it'd pay well, they'd take a sabbatical, they'd write a great book, the world would be a better place because of it, and then they'd go back, right? But it's so hard to get published and go through all of these, jump through all these loops, and it takes years and years finding an agent and this and that, that I feel it's what we're not seeing that's the greatest tragedy. It's all of the missing books, in the same way that some systems, like, you don't get startups, so you're missing all of the innovation in the businesses. But in this case, it's the icebreaker concept that we talked about. Is like, Jimmy's an icebreaker, right? He tells me about how, like, he's gonna wake up at 4 a.m. and write until 8 and then do other things during the day, and like, he has a calling for it. He's gonna do it whatever it takes, right? But most people could have great ideas, but may not be willing to just power through anything to get it done. And so that's the real tragedy.
Well, and let me jump off on this one, because this is actually really important. It's one of those things that, like, I try to always think about the ways that my work can encourage other people to create things, right? Broadly defined. Like, whatever your thing is, I hope that some part of my work, like, actually leads people to want to, like, create stuff, right? And what I would say is this: there was an era where if you got your book proposal rejected a dozen times, you just stopped. You just gave up. You put the proposal on a shelf. You never came back to it. We are not in that era anymore. So if you are listening and you have written a book proposal and you took it to an agent and the agent took it out and they couldn't sell it, screw them. Go publish it. Find a partner, upload it to Kindle, write it, distribute it. You have more tools available now than an agent who maybe sent your proposal out to 20 places and then decided when it wasn't accepted that it wasn't good enough. And I will speak from personal experience over the last 4 weeks, where I had a project that I was working on with someone I know. I encouraged her to find a new agent. We did end up selling it, but it was rejected the first time around. It was accepted the second time around. And there's still no sort of rhyme or reason to this process, right? It's not like the proposal meaningfully changed. We just sent it to a bunch of different people's email addresses. What I would say is, for people who haven't had, if they think they have a great idea and they really know there's sparks there, right? Or even if they don't, just get it done, publish it, ship it, and see what happens. It's actually, you're right about it. One of the great casualties is like, I've met so many people who will write a proposal, get those first set of rejections, get super discouraged, but you now have, in 2023, avenues to getting things published. And you know what? If you get rejected, you kind of have a chip on your shoulder too. You've got something to prove, which is even better. You got a little rocket fuel to say, listen up, Random House. You didn't like the idea? Fine. I'm going to go sell 1 million copies and you see if you like it then. We all know, or we know the work of Morgan Housel. I think you two know him more personally.
Yes.
He's a perfect example. Psychology of Money. How many people rejected that book, right? And he got a contract from Harriman House. It sold over 2 million copies, right? We on and on. Examples like this. Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. J.K. Rowling, rejected by 12 publishers, accepted by the 13th. In 2023, what I would tell the young J.K. Rowling: write the book, make it great, upload it to Amazon, and if it takes off, you are going to be the one who profits from this, not some publisher, right? And it takes, by the way, it takes nothing. Like, I know publishers have only a limited number of books that they can publish, but I increasingly find that some of those decisions aren't made by real criteria. They're made by artificial criteria. Somebody in the organization doesn't particularly like a book or like a concept, and they'll just say, nah, it's not for us, without any real, like, wait, hold on, like, why are we rejecting this, right? Is there a real reason? And it's like the most important thing I would say, and I like need to underline this point: a rejection from a traditional publisher in the modern era is utterly, utterly meaningless. It means nothing. Get the book done. You will find a home for it.
And my first book, Invest Like the Best, my wife, my long-suffering wife, is very practical, whereas I tend not to be. And we were out on a walk, and and I looked at her and I go, by the way, did I tell you I decided I really have to write a book to put my name on the map here? And she's like, okay, what are you going to write the book about? And I said, well, I'm going to write it about how you can clone any money manager using a large database and create these clone portfolios that should do just as well as the manager. Okay, and you do know you have to have a publisher, right, Jim? And I went, of course I know that. And there was no internet, right, guys? You guys can't even envision it, but there wasn't. So I went to a bookstore. We used to go to them regularly with our kids. That was our weekend event. And I just bought one of those big books with all of the publishers' addresses and everything in it. I had to do it the old-fashioned way on a typewriter. I sent out 100 query letters. And like I used to have, and unfortunately it got lost. I kept all of the rejections. I sent out 100 query letters. I got 98 rejections. And
Wow.
I got 2 acceptances. That's
Wow.
all I needed was 1, right? And so I kept the rejections because some of them were really hysterical. Like, dear Mr. O'Shaughnessy, I do not understand why you would have, in your wildest dreams, thought that we would be in the least bit interested in such a boring and, awful topic. We have no interest in your book. Please don't contact us again.
It's like that scene from that Adam Sandler movie where he's like, I award you no points and may God have mercy on your soul, right? It's like all of us in this room are dumber for having listened to you. I award you no points and may God have mercy on your soul. And then Adam Sandler's like, a simple wrong would have been fine.
It's not even a rejection. It's like they're trying to double reject you just to make sure.
Oh, totally. And my first editor at McGraw-Hill was a lovely young woman who really did not take the right tact with me, in that she was very school marmish and like, you can't do this, you can't do that, you must do it this way. And so literally I burned an entire day just coming up with the funniest letter that I possibly could write, where I made sure that I made every grammatical error and every other error that you can make with 10 exclamation points. And
Did
Did that go well?
Yeah. So let's play the opposite part of it, because this is the other part that will be educational for the audience. So if somebody's listening, they might say, well, this is all well and good, Michael, Jim, and Jim, like, fantastic. But then what does a traditional publisher do that I should replicate or find a way to create the scaffolding for infrastructure for myself? And I will offer a few, and then you two should dive in as well. One exceptional thing that traditional publishers do that is super, super, super important is accountability, right? Meaning a lot of people in the world want to write a book. Everybody and their brother says, I got a book in me, I want to write a book. But the thing is, until you sign the contract to do it, you often don't have either the motivation or the fear to get it done. And the truth is, one of the things that publishers do is they set deadlines, they set timelines, they create a calendar, and they actually force you to get the work done. Now, it sounds minor, except like we know it's not. Like, that can actually have a very powerful forcing function. Once the wire transfer hits your account and you sign a piece of paper that has a bunch of legal stuff on it, you get kind of scared if you don't deliver. And that's important, because it actually is the kind of thing that might prevent like someone from doing the book, which is the lack of clear deadlines and a process and everything else. So that is one thing that, like, to their credit, traditional publishers are exceptionally good at saying, if you're working with us, like, we're only taking you on if we think you can plausibly finish this project. And we have a timeline because we have a sales cycle that will require you to finish it along, X amount of time. I don't think that should be underestimated. That's benefit one. Benefit two, I have had editors, particularly my last editor, who see the forest for the trees on a book, meaning they take a look at all the words and junk I put together and they say, hey, you got to dial it back here, or nip and tuck here, or you haven't made this clear to me. Now, I had the benefit of an amazing editor. Stephanie, if you're from Simon & Schuster, if you're listening, you're amazing. Kudos to you. because she went in and was a real hustler and read every page and called me out when necessary and sort of forced my head back to where the chapter should say or this paragraph should say. Not all editors do that in contemporary publishing. In fact, there's a lot of places where you'll just hear stories about authors like, I just sent my manuscript in and that was it. That was all that happened. Why does this matter for somebody who's not working with a traditional publisher? Because you probably want to go on Upwork or like some other freelance site and find someone to pay to edit, find a second or third or fourth set of eyes, because you can pay for that now in a way you couldn't 20 years ago. And you can have the same kind of rigor brought to the process, which is, by the way, again, a good thing that traditional publishers do is they bring that rigor. Third thing they do, and then I'll stop because I got, we want to be fair. Like I want to be fair. I am regularly and to this day, like amazed at what the copy editing teams within traditional publishers will find that I could not have found myself. Even though I had read the manuscript a dozen times, a copy editor will find an apostrophe that's out of place or an M dash that shouldn't be there or a sentence where I didn't cite something or a run on. And I'm saying this as somebody who's like pretty insanely obsessive about my writing. Like it still blows me away when they find mistakes because they're just that good. Some of those copy editors are hired freelance. So for anyone listening who doesn't have a traditional publishing contract, hire yourself a really insane, obsessive English teacher style copy editor who is just going to beat your draft up to oblivion and get it into a better place, because it is one of the things that traditional publishers do really well. Final thing, and then I'm going to stop. Traditional publishers do a good job of unifying and creating a sense of occasion around the moment of publishing. They publish the Kindle, audio, and traditional books on the same day. Super, super, super important, because if you're promoting, you want as many bites at the apple as you can get. Because of the way they organize their operations, they are very good at that. I have found that some self-published authors like totally forget to do audio, or they'll do the ebook and the audio, but they'll forget that some people want to read physical books, or they'll under-index on like one of those three dimensions. Traditional publishing is very good about unifying it and creating one event out of all three products. That, again, is something that if you're a self-published or hybrid published author, you can control, but it's the kind of thing it's worth paying attention to. It is the reason why there is a little bit of an elevated or like kind of like a quality to the process, is because when you go to the Amazon page on the Tuesday your book publishes with Simon & Schuster, you will see all three versions there. And it's like weirdly important, not that hard to get right if you're doing it on your own, but something to pay attention to.
Let's jump in at the last part in terms of having an imperator of a publisher still matters in certain circumstances, right? Why on earth would we be doing infinite books at OSV? Well, because we're getting better and better known. I now have colleagues and teammates like Michael, who is, to my mind, one of the best curators alive today. And having a great curator, having a great thinker who could be your colleague and partner in the process of writing the book, I think that's going to add a tremendous amount, very much like your copywriters that you mentioned at the traditional publishers and the rest. And also just the amplification of the book, right? If we as a team do a good job of providing a ton of value to people, and they love our recommendations, they love the books that we talk about, etc., then we're doing our job in a win-win type way. In other words, we're providing a lot of value and much less than we're extracting. But that also works not just in publishing, it works in movies. We're doing a film division. It works in podcasting and Substacks. We're going to put together a family of those. But obviously now we've got to do a good job, right? If we don't do a good job, then our imperator is worthless. But if you do have a very worthwhile, curated platform that really delivers, and you have teammates there that can help with that project with the author, then you're getting into kind of home run territory as far as I'm concerned. As far as Morgan goes, like I love Morgan. I tried to hire Morgan way back when. And he, of course, looked at me, Jim, you are out of your fucking mind. I would never work for you. Good move, Morgan.
But by the way, Morgan's book, just as a small example of like, traditional publishers take note. If you open up the page of Psychology of Money, you see a link or a message that can send you to a specific site where for free you can download his ebook, right? Meaning,
Yeah,
and it's a genius move. It's given him 2 bites at the content apple where he only had 1.
And that's Harriman House, who we actually are still talking to about doing some sort of partnership with. We're talking to them and others.
And Jim, your point's really important. Just to your earlier point, when someone else is invested in the success of a product, it really does mean something. It is the reason why like teams can scale. It's the reason why multiple I for all of my like wish things were different. I did have a group of people who were invested in the success of the book, not as invested as I was because they were publishing a lot of books. But if you are starting from scratch and if you're trying to build this on your own, you will have to find a way to like construct that investment. That's hard to do. Like where top to bottom, the company says, we're going to choose you. You're going to do a good job. We want you to be successful. That's a real thing. Like, and it's not to be discounted. And it, and both of these thoughts, by the way, can coexist. We can praise what traditional publishing does well, while also critiquing the places they can do better. And I think what we're trying to do is give like a hand up, like a helping hand to some of the people who might not have been able to break through traditional publishing, but are looking at new models. And I want to like make sure that they know that like, look, you could do the work on your own. You could do it in a closet, share it with no one, publish, and maybe you publish the world's most brilliant book ever. You're far more likely to be successful if you're like in touch with Jim and he's like, no, I want your book to be successful. We're going to publish it in Infinite Books. And here's like the team that's going to help you. And you're still on the hook. You're still the quarterback, but we've got some people who can help you with various components of this and help you think about it a little bit differently. There is value to books being team sports, not individual sports.
Totally. Liberty?
One analogy I'm thinking of, and if I look out and like the end state vision of all this, maybe a kind of unbundling in the same way that if you're starting a company today and you're doing a startup, you have access to all kinds of APIs, right? Okay, yeah, I can put my stuff on the cloud here and I can use this API to do this part so I don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? And you couple all this together and you build on that, right? But you focus on what you do best and what creates the most value, what's differentiated about you, and everything else that someone else could be doing better, you kind of outsource there. I feel with creators, a lot of the same could be possible. To take a step back, I used to be one of the early editors at Wikipedia in like 2002 or 2003. And I don't know if they still use that phrase, but at the time, one of the things they always said was, wiki is not paper. And what they were trying to tell us was that a lot of the stuff that applies to like a paper encyclopedia doesn't apply to a website with infinite space, right? I feel like with creation in the digital world, we have to start thinking like that. I'd much rather have 1 million books being published every year, and then the cream of the crop rises to the top, and the absolute number of good books increases, and the median level of those good books is even higher, right? Because you're picking from a larger pool than to have a bunch of gatekeepers that make sure that only 20,000 books are published a year, and they're the ones who are going to tell us which ones are the good ones. But I don't feel that's the way. I feel like I'd rather make it much easier for everybody to create with a book, a Substack, a podcast, anything, and then these people can use some of these other resources, right? So I'm glad, Jimmy, that you were talking about how there are like you can hire a copy editor or editor, or there should be like project managers, right, who keep you on schedule for people who have trouble. Every function like this could be outsourced to an independent person. And the funny thing is that I would guess that these people, if they're good, they're going to make a lot more money being in a kind of marketplace online and building their own reputation and direct relationship with clients than if they're part of a publisher where it's all of the publisher's name, right, that's on the front door. And so you could hire like an editor, a fact checker, I don't know, someone to call you every Friday and ask about how you're doing and how it's going, right? Anything you need to get it done, you should be able to find. And then on the other side, standing for the readers or the listeners or whatever, I wish there were tons of curators, right? It could be like, I'm writing my Substack, I'm trying to point to interesting stuff, right? And that's a service. OSV is going to find tons of great stuff, and we're going to point people to it. We're going to help it exist sometimes if the person didn't have all of the parts, right? We can help give them all those pieces so that the machine can start. But I wish there were lots of others that did this curation, and everybody can get best at what they do best, rather than have this old monolith that was born 60 years ago or something, trying to do every part of the job, and kind of, the whole thing kind of has a bunch of bottlenecks and old ways of doing things that doesn't produce a good result in the digital world, right? Maybe when you only have so many printing presses and you're limited by trucks and bookshelf, you only have 20,000 books a year, but like the internet is not paper.
100%. And it is the cultural leg of adoption that fascinates me. Now, we are adopting faster. I mean, all you have to do is look at GPT-4, the number of people using that, the number of people who use our Stable Diffusion for artwork. We were flabbergasted by how quickly, after we released the first Stable Diffusion model last August in 2022, how rapidly it was adopted, but also how rapidly other innovators, creators, used it as a base to build apps that we didn't even think about.
I have an anecdote for that. Speaking of copy editors, I don't have a copy editor, and I write 3 times a week, right? So if I had more time, I could reread and do more passes. But what I'm doing these days, I pay for an app called Barely.ai. It's co-founded by one of our friends, Trung Phan. And in the morning, when I'm doing my final pass, I use this app which interfaces with GPT-4 now as an API, and I do it grammar correction on my stuff, and it catches a bunch of stuff that I didn't see. And that's my copy editor right now. It's a robot, basically, right? So some of these tools are going to make a lot of that more accessible. And I feel like it's going to also amplify the talent of the very best, right? The very best editor, the very best copywriter will use these tools to do 80% of the drudgery and the make work, and then it'll free up their time. The 20% that's left is going to be leveraged for much higher value work that's going to make a bigger difference to your book or your podcast or whatever, right? So I'm already living a little bit in there, but I'm sure I'm going to find more tools over time.
Totally. Jimmy, do you make use of those tools extensively?
100% yes. For a few reasons. So I'll give some specific examples. For the founder's book, perfect example is even before some of the contemporary AI tools took off, there was this service called Otter.ai. And Otter.ai does AI-driven transcriptions of audio. There were services for this where they'd pay a human being, but the cost is so prohibitive for somebody who's a solo creator or a solopreneur, right? With Otter AI, I could pay $9.95 a month, and I was getting pretty good transcriptions of the hundreds of interviews I did for the PayPal book. And it allowed the people that I was like, it allowed me and a fact checker to go in and very quickly make sure that I had quoted people accurately. And so that tool was like a total blessing. I mean, it was crazy. I recommend it all the time. I have no affiliation with them at all, but I recommend it all the time for people who are doing interview heavy books, because it's the cheapest way to get transcriptions, and you're not using a service where you're going to pay by the minute, right? There are plagiarism checkers online. By the way, I still laugh anytime there's like a plagiarism scandal within like publishing, because I'm just thinking to myself, like, you just got to upload the manuscript to these services. They like check it against like a million sources. It's not that hard. And it's only going to get better because of AI. There's some long article recently about some novel that created a stir within publishing. And it was like, there were big passages lifted out of other things. And I just thought to myself, like, there's literally a service, like this exists so that like college professors can check their students' work. You just got to upload the PDF and you can check it against that, right? There's a service called PickFu. I don't know if it's like pickfu.com or PickFu, whatever it is. PickFu.com is the cheapest service I've ever seen to test cover art. So when I got a bunch of different renditions of the PayPal cover, I wanted to make sure that the one that we were going to go with was going to work. You can pay, it's a couple $100, and you get not just like numerical feedback for what people will choose, but actual like written responses from people. And are you going to get like precise peer-reviewed data? No, but is it going to be directionally super accurate? Yeah, I've tested it again and again and again. I use services like, I mean, it's not a service, it's a piece of software called Scrivener. It's like Microsoft Word, like kind of always described as like Microsoft Word went to the gym for 10 years and out emerged Scrivener. And it's just a really good tool for long form kind of writing. I use Google Docs to collaborate with people. I read the cool thing about Google Docs is not what people expect. People think that the value is the cloud. Yeah, that's part of the value. The real value is you can edit on your phone. So I edit all the chapters of my books on the phone because it's a very different experience editing than when you are editing on the computer. And so many people are reading on like a tinier form factor, whether that's an iPad or whatever, that it's actually a good idea to like see if you've like written your book in a way that's not phone friendly, right? So I am all about authors using tools like this to like do what they can to speed up the work, to make it more efficient, to make it more accurate. And I'm like, I mean, I could go on for at some length. I would say that ChatGPT-3 is a great example of I use it to brainstorm everything now. Like, why not? It's like having another brain by your side. And you can say, hey, I hear some title. Yeah, I used it this morning for some chapter title ideas for something. I said, here's a couple words. Can you come up with 20 chapter titles for a thing, right? And why not? Because it maybe like shakes loose a word that I hadn't thought of. I'm very I'm one of these people. I still believe there's like real value in the book form. Like, somebody listening could plausibly ask, like, why do a book? I still think there's real value in the length, the rigor, the kind of the taking of all these ideas that are all over the place and sort of stitching them together into this compressed volume. There's still value in that, but that can live alongside the view that tools can make your work easier, connect you to new audiences, speed things up, make things cheaper, make things more efficient. Like, I don't like, there's no contradiction in that for me, right? Like, it's like one of these like very basic realities that if you are a writer, you have access to more resources, and you have access to actually more resources than even your publisher does when it comes to figuring this stuff out. Let me give you a really specific example. This is funny. This just came back to me. I was doing the notes and the bibliography for Founders, which, as you both know, was super extensive, right? So I looked online because I was trying to figure out, like, am I going to have to write all these citations manually? How am I going to make sure the formatting's all whatever? Because there's really specific formats for citations. There's a site, I think it's called ZBib or something. It's like ZBib. And ZBib is like a bibliography service. And it made everything super, super simple. I could type in a website, like an Amazon website for a book, and it would create the notes entry. It would create the citation for me, right? It was amazing. And it like saved me, I mean, hundreds of hours, right? And I sent it along to my publisher. And what I said is, look, I'm in the business of helping other authors. If there are other Simon & Schuster authors that have a lot of notes or endnotes or citations, they should totally use this service. It's totally free service, and it saved me time and time again because it just made things simple and it made things accurate. So I am like very pro digital tools to help authors. And I think they're just going to lead to the creation of better work.
And again, this just dovetails so beautifully with what my central thesis is for going forward here. People are now, specifically, people are freaking out about AI right now, but let's just put all of these into categories of incredibly powerful and useful tools. And, Archimedes' lever, right? I passionately believe that the Centaur model of AI, which is human plus AI, is going to work better than many of the other models, at least for the foreseeable future. And if we just think about it in those terms, these are all just levers, but they're incredibly powerful, and they save, as you just pointed out, that's a great example. I remember writing the notes for What Works, and like, I was literally just spent. You couldn't even see straight after trying to find all the citations and link them back to the academic paper that I'd gotten it from. And of course, it was all paper. It was all, okay, so here were the notes from chapter 1. Here are then here's the paper that I got those from. Oh my God, what I would have given for that tool alone, because that was weeks. That was literally weeks of my time. And, I was fortunate in that my wife graduated summa cum laude with a degree in journalism, and she was my editor, right? So I realized how fortunate I was to have that happen. Now, though, with the plethora of both people and tools, and people united with those tools, like, it's just going to make the ability to get back to both of your themes, whereby we should be able to see 1 million new books a year, right? I'm very much into the whole idea that for most of human history, geniuses were born, lived, and died. They didn't know they were a genius. Nobody else knew they were a genius. And they were bound by their geography, by their religion, by their sex, by fill in the blank, right? And that's gone. That is gone. We can find all these people. In the case of investing, we can fund them. We're doing that with the fellowship program. We're doing it with the adventures venture arm. But like, to me, this is like, what an exciting time to be alive. And, I have a lot of grandchildren, and I'm just looking at them like, oh, your life is going to be so great. Liberty.
Yes, yeah, 100% with you. I think it's an exciting inflection point in all of this, right? And I have so much respect for both of you for writing books, like uphill in the snow both ways, because I'm a short form writer, and I can't imagine working so long on the project without much feedback, right? I write, and 15 minutes later, I start getting emails and, oh, you got this wrong, I like this. And working for years on the book, going through all of what we talked about today, and then having something great come out at the end must be, I don't know, it feels like the metabolism of writing books is something that it's hard enough on itself. We should remove as much friction from it as possible to get as many good ones as possible, because I can't even imagine. Anyway, just tip of the hat to both of you for writing books.
Well, and I appreciate that. Although there's also a part of it where I'm envious of what you do with like the consistency with which you're in touch with your audience. And I think what Jim was saying, to get back to his original point about a living book, I suspect that there's a way to blend those styles of work. I mean, I know creators who are doing it already, right? You mentioned the person who's publishing his book on Substack, but my sense is that there's some middle ground by which, you'll be able to take advantage of short form engagement, interaction, translate it to the book. I mean, there are a bunch of different people who've done well in that kind of thing. What I would say is there is still room for long form projects that are book length. Like, the interesting thing about the industry is, like, for all of the shade we kind of sort of just threw at it, like, the publishing industry's been having a banner few years, right? It wasn't just because of the pandemic. I mean, they've been making a lot of money, and audiobooks in particular, very high margin, one digital product, zero cost of distribution, no need to ship it to a bookstore, and you're trading on Audible credits. I mean, it's like but nobody wants to talk about this, but it's a massive business and it's growing like gangbusters. And it's like one of those places where, like, the models just keep getting better. The more people that get iPhones, the more people that get phones in general, the bigger the audience. The potential for translating content is huge, right? Which is super untapped. Foreign rights, foreign markets, like one of the places I'm going to focus this year is like figuring out, like, why isn't my book in Turkish? Like, why isn't my book in, insert the language? And that, to me, like, it's like one of the things that excites me also is that this is not an industry in decline. Like, it's actually an industry that's growing, and that's great. Like, the trend line is moving in the right direction. And I would just hope that more people, as per your comments, Liberty, like, more people decide that they're going to do it. They're going to do it at length. They're going to take the time to put something on a paper. They're going to invest in the quality of it, and they're going to find a way to bring it to life, whether somebody in New York at a publishing house says they should or shouldn't.
And there's clearly no demand problem, right? TikTok is selling tons of books, apparently. Book Talk is a thing, and a bunch of publishers get their book featured in some viral videos, and people do summaries of books. The demand is there. It's almost like the industry is successful despite a bunch of its problems. And if we could just fix some of the problems, it would be even better, right? If there are 1 million books and the absolute number of good books is higher, and the number of niches, of interest niches that get a great book is higher, more people are going to read them, right? It feels like we have to improve the supply, but the demand is there. A lot of the time, it feels like what's been keeping the supply down has been like friction, right? Before audiobooks, a bunch of people would have read, but it was just too much friction. Removing all of that, I think, will make us realize that there's much more demand than we ever thought.
Yeah. I also think, and Jim, you may know this better, but there's a lot of consolidation happening within that industry. Like, the Penguin Simon and Schuster merger or whatever didn't happen, but, like, it's only a matter of time before the conglomerates get big. And look, there's a new model of publishing that crops up every day. There are people doing the kind of experiments that you're going to do. What I would say, to your point, Liberty, is I don't think that traditional publishing is necessarily going to change, or it's not going to change fast enough. Here's what's going to happen. Authors are going to take advantage of the tools that are available. Authors are going to fight for better contracts. Authors are going to remember that they have 1 million followers on TikTok, not the publisher. They're going to, like, try to do some things that are different. So it is just the case that, like, as with other parts of the creator economy, the individual creators are going to recognize the power and leverage that they have. That's one. The second is the gatekeepers, like you sort of said, you want to bring down the gatekeepers. You won't need to, like, the gates are creaky and they're falling apart, like, meaning like there's no gates anymore because you could get a book published however you want to. More people will wake up to that over time. So I'm actually, like, it's in a funny way, I'm not worried about the publishing industry's fortunes because they're going to continue to do what they're going to do with the kind of tip of the whatever of authors. I'm also, like, hopeful that more people who want to do books who have maybe never set foot in, like, one of these cocktail parties where people decide what gets published. Like, I hope that those people just say, well, I know like 10 people who have done books on their own and they've done super well. So I'm almost like trying to make sure that the message gets out that you don't have to do it this way anymore. Right. And that, like, but both at the level of, like, individual creators who just want to do books, and then also, like, people who have done books with traditional publishers, that everybody's trying to blow up the model and think about a totally different way to do it. And, like, that, more people need to hear that, because that's what's going to lead to, like, some person who's in college who's written, like, a great paper for a thesis, sends it to some publisher. The publisher's like, no, but it turns out to be this, like, really path-breaking book. I hope they take advantage of some of these tools and technologies.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that's what we're seeing happening, right? It's a bit like once the market senses an opportunity, you can try to legislate it out of existence. You can try to make laws to say you can't do that. It's good luck. I finished recently the book Reality Hunger, and I'm forgetting the author's name. It's really a good book. He's an essay writer. And like your comment about the cell phone, he actually has a thing in there saying we better learn how to write content for cell phones because it's a different experience. It appears to you differently than it does in a traditional book format or even an ebook or audio. But, like, all of these things are going to happen. They're happening right now. And you can decide where you're going to be on the S curve, right? Are you going to be down here, or are you going to say, phooey, no, I got my library card. That's all I need. Hey, I love libraries. I still love libraries. I love going into them. I love, perusing the shelves. But let's be honest. I mean, like, the vast majority of the reading that I do on my computer, on the Kindle app. And it's just the easiest way for me to do it. Audio is another massive market. And, my son, Patrick, got this before I did because I'm more of a reader. Like, he's like, dude, like his whole Colossus thing, he thinks that is going to be able to replace a traditional MBA at some point. And so I love those kind of ways of extending these things, because voice is that's our original communication format, right? Kids come out with the software fully installed. You don't have to do anything, and they're going to learn how to speak the language of the environment in which they are being raised. But teach a kid to read, that the weirdest people in the world, it literally had to colonize a different part of our brain, which was given over during our hunter-gatherer days to visual acuity. Because friend or foe, Grog over there I think he's a foe. Let's kill him. But even with as long as we've had the printed word, it still is not installed software like voice, where voice story is the fuel that humanity runs on, right? So it's like there's this rich and deep vein that is just now. And sometimes I look at all of the opportunities here, and I'm just like, holy shit, I don't even know where we start, right?
Absolutely.
Well, and it's also like to get back to a point we made earlier, it doesn't have to look or feel the way it's always been. Like, if there's somebody in traditional publishing listening, and I hope they are, my encouragement would be treat audio as its own publishing thing. Do it totally differently than the book.
Yep.
And watch the sales like kind of roll in, meaning if you have a hit with the hardcover and the audio is something different, you know, it's the iPad to the MacBook, right? Sort of do the same thing, but they're a little different, right? You can sort of like there's a little bit of overlap in what they do, but it's totally different experiences. And to my mind, that's like the real opportunity is for someone who says, hey, why don't we just actually like disintermediate ourselves, make killer audiobooks where we insert the name of the publisher, are like recognized for the quality of these books, like that they are totally different, that we engage the author in different ways, that we actually create a whole different kind of experience. Because I'm with you, like I think there's just, I have a different connection to the books that I buy on audio. Sometimes I buy the audio and the real thing, but it is the original art form, it's the original storytelling medium, but we are treating it as a carbon copy of the thing that's stuck between two pieces of cardboard. There's no reason for that.
But that's us, right? That's human OS. Like when we first came up with movies, right? What did we do? We filmed plays because like that was what we were used to. And people, like when you go back to the source material, it's fascinating because like when radio came around, they were like, well, what should we have sermons? Should it be like Chautauqua? Like nobody knew. And so it's always easy retrospectively to say, oh, what idiots they were. But like we see it happening with us right now. There are all of these incredible technologies, and like the sin of trying to understand things too quickly really is very difficult for we humans, because we always want to believe that oh yeah, I get that. No, you fucking don't get it. And you're going to take some time to get it. And it's going to iterate, change. And yet it also leads me to the thought of like the mindset. Like during the whole pandemic, there was this massive mind virus, which was bad for the world, but mind viruses in general, right? It's like, yeah, no, we don't do it that way. Or that's a view that we don't believe that we would be willing to condone. And the thought really struck me when I don't watch TV anymore unless my wife's here, and she splits time between here and the city because she's a street photographer. She has a book too. In fact, all of my kids are authors except my youngest. Anyway, so when she's here, we'll like put a movie on. And so we put Elizabeth on, the one, which is a great movie, by the way, with Kate Blanchett playing the lead role. And then we got into a discussion of it later, and two things kind of emerged. The first was like, there is this never ending amount of source material. If you want to make a movie like Elizabeth, it's just a really great movie because what a great content that woman provided. But then I was also, we were talking about like, so Hollywood ostensibly supposed to want to make money, right? They show business, right? And yet they make a movie like Maverick, whatever the sequel was, and it rocks every box office. It sells billions of dollars worth of tickets. You would think that there would be somebody sitting in Hollywood thinking, it's really interesting that all of these ideological movies that we made trying to pound people over the head with our point of view, they didn't sell any tickets at all. And Maverick just made like $4 billion. You think we should make a couple more of those?
Do you know what would change that?
What?
If you created a guerrilla Oscars. So take the word Oscar, like reverse it, right? Maybe what's that, like Raxo, right? Recreate the Raxos. The Raxo, Jim, you should endow the Raxos, make it like $1 bigger, make the trophy look the same, and you award the Raxos for, right, like for basically like what you're talking about. I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm really not kidding, actually. I think, well, because awards have signaling value, right? And there's a certain structure to the academy and everything they do. And it's like, I often think of it as like papal selection, it's like this like really arcane ancient process. But if you did the Raxos, and like that year's picture of the year Raxo went to Top Gun Maverick, and it came with, let's say the prize was 3x. Like, I don't know what somebody gets for winning an Oscar. Let's say it was like I don't know, like $1 million instead of 300. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, attach some prestige to it, and it will fundamentally change the nature of the business. And this is true writ large, by the way. There's so many. My view is like in addition to the mediums themselves being disrupted, I think all awards processes stand to be disrupted in the next 10 to 20 years, because we've sort of realized that like there's no real logic to them, that like that it ends up being sort of faintly small p political in some way. And so I think like the Pulitzers are going to get disrupted. I think it's like happening. I think it's like somebody's going to do the Raxos, right? And it's I think it's going to be amazing.
I will go on record here committing O'Shaughnessy Ventures to doing the Raxos.
Because we're breaking news.
Brilliant idea. Michael, you're going to be responsible for that, of course.
Yeah, but I think what you're getting, I think the other thing you're getting at, and this is an important point that ties together the whole nature of the conversation. Like Paul Graham wrote an essay about like being very, and other people have talked about being very wary of prestige. And I will freely admit that like as a product of like immigrant kids, or as a product of, I was an immigrant myself, my parents were immigrants, getting into a prestigious college was, smiled upon and like was something they really pushed me to. Getting a prestigious job at McKinsey after graduating was really important to them because it was about security. Prestige and security were connected for my family. So getting into a prestigious place was important because it was a mark of security. It wasn't even about them being able to tell their friends. It was more like, we want to make sure that, you don't have to struggle the way we did. I respect that. But increasingly, the return on prestige is lower and lower, as we all know. You can, and in fact, if anything, the opposite of prestige or that sort of chasing prestige might be authenticity. The returns on authenticity are going up. The returns on prestige are going down, which is also true for businesses like books and movies and everything else. Meaning, it's important to cast a critical eye on something where you're chasing, like a good example is like the New York Times bestseller list. For listeners, the New York Times bestseller list does not report best-selling books. It reports best-selling books that the editors of the New York Times decide are worthy for being included on the list. There was a famous lawsuit in the 1980s. Seth Godin has talked about this, that it really, even the moniker New York Times bestseller list is a misnomer, that they often will just pick and choose who they want to put on there and then vaguely base it on sales numbers. The Wall Street Journal list is a little bit more accurate. The USA Today list is a little bit more accurate. But where in all three cases, you're really talking about contests of prestige. And to be clear, like there's value in those contests for authors, but I think that value is a declining asset. I don't think that, like, I think in general now you're seeing less return on that kind of investment. And it's why like the biggest blockbuster films aren't going to be the one that win awards, but they are going to make the people who made them fabulously wealthy, and they're going to, have cultural cachet. I think that inversion is going to accelerate. And I think it affects books. And here's the way it affects somebody listening who wants to do a book. Don't worry about the bestseller list. Alex Hormozy has this book, $100 million Offers. I think last time I heard him on a podcast, he's a really interesting creator, business guy. Last time I heard Alex on a podcast, he said he had sold 200,000 copies of $100 million Offers, his book. It's this giant book that he's like self-published. 200,000 copies puts him way ahead of pretty much everybody on the New York Times bestseller list. And he has not made it onto that list. And so it's just this very peculiar thing that I think people need to appreciate, that a lot of the markers of prestige are false markers. And I think they are all going to come kind of like eroding or collapsing because people just have more access to information now. I've just told an audience that the New York Times bestseller list doesn't accurately reflect best-selling books. Do you think you're going to believe that title for much longer? Probably not.
Yeah. And the walls this is another big part of my thesis. The walls are tumbling down. And that whole Potemkin village, like manufactured reality where you could do it. Back when I was growing up, right, there were 3 networks and there were 2 newspapers that meant anything. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. They were the only real national newspapers in the United States, the 3 networks in the United States, and that was it. So really easy to control the perception of reality. Right? It's like, well, God, Uncle Walter Cronkite said it, and the New York Times, I just read the same article there. It was really easy to program society with those kind of limited access. Talk about gatekeeper power, right? And so it's also why you see all of the traditional gatekeepers having these meltdowns, because there's nothing they can do to stop this tsunami that is coming over societies everywhere. It's like one of the reasons why I to just bring AI back into it, that I think open is going to be closed, is I just read an article about the Chinese trying to develop their AI, right? Well, you can't have certain numbers. You can't have anything that might make people think about Tiananmen Square, which didn't happen, right? So they have all of these taboo third rails that they won't allow their researchers to touch. You're gonna lose. You're gonna lose in a world that is now interconnected, ultimately networked, and like the emperor is naked and everyone's just laughing now, right? I watch these old school, like the World Economic Forum. It's 2030, you own nothing and you're happy. And it's just a big joke. It's so funny because they're so ham-handed and they suck at propaganda. And it's so bad that people use it just as a joke to mock them with. And like, they're not getting it. And I just love that they're not getting it. So I love it. You're absolutely right about prestige, awards, all that kind of stuff. I would say, though, like, I went through all of Will Storr's books. If you haven't read Will, I urge you to read Will's books. He is a great thinker, and his book on status is really something you need to read, because he makes I used to believe that I didn't signal, right? I didn't signal. And like, I was fucking wrong. I signal all the time. I'm signaling right now. And what guys like Will help me in conversation and also reading his books understand is it's it's built into our base code, right? If you're living in a hunter-gatherer society, you first want to fit in, then you want to stand out, right? And so as he makes the point much more eloquently than I'm doing so now in his book, you can't not play the status game, but you can play different kinds of status games that lead to really great outcomes, right? And so, like your reward idea, that's one of them. Like Michael's and your newsletter are like, that is in my opinion, going to become like a super high status thing to be a great curator. And I think it's also going to be very remunerative, right? Because we've got this overload of information, and the ability to have a great curatorial mind, or a great author like you, Jimmy, or a great curator like you, Michael. That's gold. I mean, that's just gold.
And I would add, like, Michael, I will kick the mic to you maybe for the last word, but I would say also, there's often a false choice that's presented to people who are in creative work. Like, they're presented with the following false choice. You can either write something that's like critically gets really good reviews and is in the hunt for prizes, or you can write something that people actually want to read and has mass market appeal. And I completely reject that. That's like a totally artificial thing. Like, you even though everyone has the capacity to write and create books, what I am not suggesting is that everyone go out and do it in 24 hours and upload it on Amazon tomorrow. Take some time. Like, the value of it's not a prestige game to invest in good work. It's not chasing prestige or status to take time to read the best books in your genre and to learn from what they are, right? Like, whatever that might mean for you, right? If it's like science fiction fantasy, if it's like in my genre, like I went to school on the best business books written over, let's say, the last 25 years to understand what made them work so that I knew what to do for the founders. And it's not like a copy and paste. It's more like learning the language. It's like sort of learning the vocabulary of a given space. I think one thing that's challenging is, and one thing, by the way, that admittedly publishers do really well, is they actually, in many cases, can figure out who has the desire to really go for quality, like to really go for broke and want to put, nose to the grindstone. There's a spot on the Venn diagram, though, where it's like, you can do that. You can like, you can chase quality without saying like it's Pulitzer or bust, or it's Times List or bust, right? Where like you could find a spot in the middle where you can reach an audience and also do work that's really high quality and has depth and breadth and rigor. It's like one of these weird tensions, because you also don't want people to just be writing like 50-page PDFs and then uploading them. That I'm like, like somebody listening would be like, well, my 75-page PDF didn't take off. You're totally wrong. And it's like, well, like there are still standards for work. There's still there are still things you could do to make your work better. There are questions you can learn to ask. And by the way, I don't have settled answers exactly for how to do this, but I don't want to also like Robert Caro spent 10 years writing The Power Broker and every one of his subsequent books. We don't want to get into a world where that's impossible or it's seen as like third rate or quaint or archaic, because actually the amount of time he spent was really intimately tied into the end state of that product, right? And so it's this very funny thing, because at the same time that I want to encourage like everybody to do their best work, I also want to like underline best, like bring it, like really go, like do a job, like try, like really give it your all, right?
Try
And
hard.
yeah, like it's like I'm Jim. I'm sure like when you were doing your first books, you had your wife read them, you went over them a bunch, you sweated it a lot. It's like late nights, all of that. But that panic is productive panic.
Yeah. And, and I'm going to give Michael the last word, but on your point about saying quality versus, prestige versus sales, I just watched a great documentary about Kurt Vonnegut, who I love. And it's made by the guy who is the director for Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Which I love this guy because he doesn't even bring up the fact that he is the director of Curb Your Enthusiasm until like the 1 hour and 30-minute mark of this documentary that he's making about Vonnegut. But he interviews John Irvine, another author I admire, and about his time as being a professor with Vonnegut in Iowa. And Irvine said, Vonnegut said something that really stuck with me. And it's this idea about, and I'm going to get the quote wrong, but I'll get the spirit of it right. This idea of the false choice. And it was Vonnegut saying to Irvine, the idea that you have to choose between being a serious author or an entertaining author is a false one. He said, because even if you choose to be a very serious author, you also better be an entertaining author, right? And that's near and dear to my heart, because play is something that's also baked into our DNA. That's how kids learn. I just have the greatest time watching my grandchildren because everything is play. Everything is play. And that's how we learn. And you watch animals, they learn through play. So it is a false dichotomy. Yeah, if you really want to make an impact, be very serious. Do the work. It's hard. It is hard, but also learn to entertain people, because you're not going to get very many people who are going to.
This is the perfect way to pass the mic to Michael, because his newsletter does this better than anything I have ever seen. He makes me think, and then he makes me laugh, and it's his newsletter is the distilled essence of what you just described.
Exactly. Michael, you get the last word.
It's just, I can't help the stupid dad jokes. No, there are like 5 different things I want to say. You make so many great points. I'm going to try to pick 1 or 2, but and Robin Hanson would be proud about the signaling, because it's there. It can't go away. Prestige matters to people, and people who say that prestige doesn't matter to them are just high enough social status that they can not care, right? So the way to deal with this, not to pretend that it doesn't exist or to say, oh, we're just going to change human nature, right? No problem. The way to deal with it is to align it in a productive direction and make it really meritocratic, right? Instead of having gatekeepers who've built up these institutions that have prestige, right? The New York Times bestseller list, and then they can attach this prestige to certain people that they approve of. That's not the way to go, right? So I think the way that the whole system is rebuilding itself kind of from the bottom up, right? Rather than top down, is going to create new sources of this prestige. And hopefully they're going to be allocated a lot more meritocratically for quality. And what will allow this to happen at scale is that when there were 3 channels and 2 newspapers, the way to have a bestseller or to make the most money was to target the middle of the bell curve. And that's where you get enough people and there's not enough shelf space, right? For every niche, every type of interest. So you have to target the very middle of the bell curve, and that's the only way to go. But today, someone like Peter Attia could have a podcast that goes like, he's going to talk about 6 hours about lipids with some expert, right? It's very, very niche and very, very technical. And I'm sure he's making an excellent living from the podcast. His medical practice is probably doing way better than it would without the podcast. Like, now you can have a niche that would never have been on the air back in the day, and it can be a great, great success, right? So if we are building a system where you can be at the top of the prestige hill for every niche, right? All of a sudden, there's a lot more prestige to go around, and there's a lot more great content for people to discover and to consume, to read, to enjoy, to learn from, right? And this sounds like such a better system than have these 3 networks with hugging all of the prestige and the airtime. And so that's why I'm excited about this transition for right, that we're just beginning. There's a joke that like the internet, the web say is about 30 years old, and that's super young. It's like, yeah, but in internet time, that's like 300 years, right? Because it moves really fast. But even though it's been that long subjectively, I think we're still pretty early in that stuff because it's so non-linear, right? So it may take 10 years to find the right format, but then once you find it, it explodes, right? So when blogs began, it started moving really, really quickly. And I feel like there's a moment now with newsletters. There's been a moment with short form video that's happening. Like YouTube has been going on for a while, but now YouTube is bigger than Hollywood and video games almost. And so we're going to figure out other ways of doing these things. And it's all about like, I don't know, this idea of aligning it with quality and with meritocracy will give us the best results. And that's what I'm going to try to work on.
Yeah. Well, and you also just gave away our business strategy for media.
Darn it. Gotta edit this out.
No, because that's the other thing I believe. Like, you can shout these things from the rooftops and it doesn't matter because very few people are going to see it through, right?
Yeah.
It's like people, when I wrote What Works on Wall Street, I had a firm come and offer to buy my original company, O'Shaughnessy Capital, a big firm. And the only proviso they had was, you can't publish that book. We're going to keep it proprietary. We're going to keep it, a black box. And I just started laughing. I'm like, you could scream this stuff from the rooftops and it won't matter because it's going to have a year or a quarter where it does poorly. And everyone's going to say, well, that used to work, but it doesn't work anymore. Right? So, well, listen, guys, this has been amazing. Thank you. For our audience, these guys are such pros. I literally emailed them earlier today saying, I just had a cancellation. You guys want to jump on a podcast completely unrehearsed? And here they were. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch this world unfold. Any final thoughts that from either of you?
Well, I would just say every time I interact with you, Jim, it's like an espresso shot. Like it's 5 o'clock and I'm like ready to take everything on now. I hope the audience feels that way because that's how I feel. Every podcast we do, I like finish it up and I'm like, I have to go do everything. I have to disintermediate myself all the time. So I love this. Thank you for having us, letting us just talk about these things. And again, like to emphasize a value that I think all 3 of us believe in. Like I say that half jokingly because the hope is that someone listening who's been waiting to take action on an idea takes action on the idea, right? Like we are like sort of one of the express purposes of what you're trying to do at OSV and what all 3 of us try to do with our work is like get people to go from 0 to 1. Or to 0 to 0.5. Just do the first thing. And it's easier than ever if you're in book land. It's easier than ever if you're in other mediums as well. But like that, I am just grateful that you're out there saying and doing these things because they're vitally important. It's like one of these things I wish I had this when I was younger. I probably would have taken action sooner if I did. So thank you to you for hosting things like this.
My pleasure. As I put on my Twitter profile, I am a loquacious provocateur.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation. And you mentioned Kurt Vonnegut earlier. And Can I close with a Kurt Vonnegut quote?
Please.
You know, you always ask the question about incepting people, and I try to do it to the listener. I don't remember in which book it is, but he has a little thing he says to newborn babies, and I love it. And he says something like, "Hello, babies, welcome to Earth. It's hot in the summer and it's cold in the winter. It's round, it's wet, and it's crowded. There's only one rule that I know of, babies. God damn it, you've got to be kind." And so the idea when incept is let's just all be a bit kinder to each other.
I love it. I love it.
That's great.
We're going to make that our collective inception for our audience today. Be kinder to everyone. It just pays such massive dividends. And if you're selfish, guess what? It's going to make you feel better too.
Amen.
Gents, thank you so much. We will do it again.
Thank you, Jim.
A pleasure always.